Matt Canavan joins me now. Minister, thanks very much for your time this morning. What exactly is the government proposing to do with the United States when it comes to developing these rare earths?
Well, David, we have been working with the US for a couple of years now to identify opportunities for Australia to help the US meet its need for critical minerals, not just rare earths, but rare earths is a key one. 2 years ago, the President asked his government to establish a list of minerals critical to the US economy. They came up with a list of 35, and Australia are in the top 5 world producers for 14 of those 35. Now, we are concentrating in our government-to-government cooperation very much on those minerals where there is a concentrated market and there are potential barriers for commercial projects to proceed in markets where there's a lot of dominance by one or only a few producers. So that does include rare earths, does include cobalt as well. And as you said in your intro, these are very important to the modern economy. This idea that mining is sometimes thought of as an old technology is ridiculous. Modern products require even more complex array of minerals than products from the industrial age. We are very lucky in Australia to have a great mineral industry, so we will do our best to establish these markets, as we've done in the past, and create new industries and new jobs for Australians.
Well, we do indeed have a very rich success story when it comes to mining in Australia, but this is largely private operators. Why can't the private sector develop rare earths?
Well, for the reasons you've outlined, the concentration in those markets make it very difficult. So obviously, when a new mine, and there are some new proposed mines around Australia at the moment, seeks to get commercial finance, there's a concern from commercial operators that in such a concentrated market, they'll struggle to maintain their position over time.
So is that because China is manipulating the market?
Well, it's because dominant suppliers can do that, David. And as I said, this is not just about the situation for rare earths. In the case of cobalt, there's a significant supply of cobalt that comes out of the Congo. But yes, we have seen behaviour in the past of those dominant producers from China or the Congo take what usually would be called strategic behaviour by a dominant supplier. You know, in some respects, it's no different.
So just to be clear on that, Are you saying China is, for strategic reasons, trying to stop the United States or anyone else developing rare earths market?
There's 2 points here. One, there's no doubt that Chinese producers are seeking to protect their market position, as dominant suppliers do from time to time, and about to say no different sometimes from the concentration we see in our retail markets and those sort of things. As two, the other point is that China has, from time to time in the past couple of decades, made various statements that it would potentially restrict the supply of rare earths on the basis of other discussions it had with countries. So 10 years ago, China made such threats to Japan, and as a result, the Japanese government supported a rare earths project in Western Australia, the Linus project. It is now by far and away the second largest producer of rare earths outside of China, or the largest producer, I should say, outside of China. And that's all because of the support from the Japanese government as a result of those Chinese threats.
So the thinking right now is that China's actions in this industry could pose some risk to our defence capability or future defence capability, or that of our big ally, the United States?
Well, of course it could. All of the concentration of all these markets could cause a risk to the security and affordability of supply of these critical minerals, including rare earths. So that's the focus here. In that context, governments from time to time do support projects through things like the Export Finance Insurance Corporation that we have here in Australia, a long-established concessional government finance organisation. More recently,
and is that what you're talking about here? I just want to get to the detail here. Are you saying the Australian government would provide some concessional loans to a private operator or to the US government? What exactly is on the table?
So this is what we're talking about with the US at the moment in the establishment of this joint action plan. We've had some constructive discussions this week. Some of these proposed mines are already in discussions with the Northern Australian Infrastructure Facility, a more recent concessional lending facility we've established at a government level. But we are looking at what we can do further to support and assist here and develop these important markets.
Where would the US come in, though? Are we talking about the US government financing some of these projects?
Well, the US is a significant customer of these products, and as you'd appreciate, in a market with these levels of concentration, if a supplier is relying just on selling spot or short-term contracts, that doesn't reduce their risk enough to get something over the line. So the US could be a long-term.
Well, they certainly, customers within the US have the capacity
to supply, to provide long-term confidence in demand. So there's various ways you can do that, David, and we're not at that level of detail, but that's obviously why we're in discussions with the US. And I've also spoken to our counterparts in Japan and Korea last month while I was there on the same issue.
So we might do this in partnership with Japan and Korea as well.
Look, I think there's a good case for worldwide cooperation here to diversify the supply of these minerals. As I say, this is not unusual in commodity markets where sometimes concentrations...
What about with China, Minister? Would we offer the same deal for China?
Well, obviously we cooperate with all countries on trade and investment here. David, the key thing here, though, is encouraging a diverse array of supply in different markets, and that's why we think Australia in particular and our rich rare earth deposits and our relatively well advanced projects puts us in a good position to cooperate with other countries. Obviously, in all these discussions, we'll be putting the Australian interest first, and a key Australian interest is to attract that investment and develop our industry.
It's not without risk investing in this area. People have lost a lot of money investing in this area. Why should Australian taxpayers be on the hook here if it does go bad, if it turns out to be a dud investment?
Well, if it contributes overall to a more richly diverse array of the supply of these types of minerals, that'll be a good thing for the world and a good thing for Australia. So that's our national interest. You're right, obviously there are risks in investing in any project and they need to be balanced and managed, but there's also the broader national interest that we'll take into account as well.
Now, speaking of China, Peter Dutton, as you know, just on Friday suggested the policies of the Chinese Communist Party are inconsistent with Australian values. Do you agree?
Well, I do. I think Peter was just stating the facts of the matter. We are a proud country and proud of our heritage and principles and values as a free and open country. And obviously, our system of government, our philosophy, is inconsistent with those of communist regimes, and that's been a long-established fact around the world. I sometimes get concerned when people within Australia, and including in the resources sector that I often deal with, say that we somehow have a choice or have to make a choice between China and other countries. There's no such choice in my view. That the only choice that we should at all contemplate is to choose Australia and to choose our interests. We are very confident, an independent nation. We pursue those interests. We pursue strong trading relationships with all different types of countries, but those trading relationships are never made subservient to our broader principles and values.
Just coming back to the point, though, you agree with Peter Dutton. What are the policies of the Chinese Communist Party that are inconsistent with our values? Well,
clearly, David, we support free and open political communication within our country. Australian governments, going back as far as I can remember, have always expressed concerns sometimes about situations in China. We do that in a respectful way. We do respect the fact that, of course, it's their country to decide on what happens, but we will always respectfully stand up for our principles and values, and we also expect, of course, that that we retain the right here to decide the situation here in Australia. We just determine the right to decide on what foreign investments are important for us. It is important for us to continue to attract investment from all countries.
Do you specifically share concerns about China's cyber attacks in Australia, its influence of Australian universities, these sorts of things?
These are all things that the Australian government has expressed concern about in recent times. Yes, I am concerned about those matters. Foreign Minister has expressed concern about the arrest of some Australian citizens and a lack of access in particular to legal representation. Of course, expressed concern about reports of the treatment of Uyghur citizens as well. We will continue to do that in a respectful way and continue to stand up for what we believe in this country.
Well, oftentimes, though, the government's reluctant to name China as being responsible for some of these things, cyber attacks, influence peddling and so on. Do you think we need to be more upfront?
Well, I don't think you can, accuse the coalition government of not standing up for our national interest and in doing so in a way sometimes which has created tension in the relationship. We have, for example, been the first government to knock back investment in agricultural land, and we've done so because we've got concerns of particularly state-owned enterprises having large investments in some of those particulars. We've also, of course, made decisions to protect our telecommunication network, and we make no apology for that because we're defending our national interest, and we've done so, of course, on the basis of legitimate issues and concerns that are shared by others around the world. So, as I say, we'll just continue to stand up for our own country. We'll do so in a way which continues to try and promote trade and investment as well. I do think we can be proud about many of the investments we've taken from China in our resources sector, and I continue to welcome that. They work very well. They've helped build our gas industry, our coal industry, and hopefully that will continue. But it'll also always be done, of course, on the terms that are consistent with our national interest.
Well, willingness there to call out China. Can I ask, is there also a willingness to call out the United States, our great friend and ally, when it does the wrong thing? And what are your thoughts on what's happened in northern Syria this week?
Well, the Australian government is concerned about the action that Turkey has taken, and we're concerned about the reports we're receiving from Syria. Obviously, the deployment of troops from the United States is a matter for the United States. I can understand the United States' position of not being able to commit to every area of the world, but of course we continue to contribute to international efforts to bring peace to the Middle East, and we'll do our best to do that.
Does it strike you as strange, though, that, just overnight Donald Trump's announced 1,800 American troops are going into Saudi Arabia, and yet he can't keep the troops there in northern Syria to keep ISIS under control?
Look, David, I'm sorry, mate, I don't do this very often. I'm going to just have to plead ignorance on those matters. I don't know, mate. I haven't really got across those reports. It's not quite in my area of responsibility, but obviously all these matters are very detailed and have to be looked on their merits individually.
No, fair enough. But are you worried about a resurgence of Islamic State right now, given what's happening there?
Well, of course, we remain concerned about the spread of extremist terrorism and Islamist terrorism in particular. We obviously have contributed significantly to efforts to reduce the influence of Islamic State in the last few years. They have been, I think, more successful than most people probably predicted at the time. We must remain vigilant, though, on that matter. And as I say, we'll continue to contribute to efforts to establish peace in the Middle East, and as well, of course, to protect our national interests and keep international terrorism subdued.
A couple of other things, just finally on the drought. The Prime Minister's today announcing $500 million matched by New South Wales for more dam infrastructure there. I'm told that is new money, so that has to be found somewhere. How far can the government go when it comes to helping farmers and communities who are really battling it, doing it tough with this drought?
Well, we've already got a lot of investment funds on the table to build dams. I think some of this funding is coming out of some of those established funds, but you're right, there's some new funding as well. This has been a long-term commitment from the coalition government. We have brought dams back onto the agenda. When we came to government 6 years ago, no one was talking about dams, and no one in government was. And now everybody is, and that's significant progress, and that's, it takes time. It takes time.
Is the issue. We don't know how long this is going to take to build.
Well, my understanding, one an upgrade and another a new dam. Some of them require additional approvals. I welcome the fact that New South Wales government has said that they'll seek to facilitate and fast-track those approvals. It does take time, David, to build large projects like this. And
what about right now, though? These do take a long time to build, as you say. What about right now? Can I ask you, what are your thoughts on farmers losing drought assistance after 4 years? Are you comfortable with that?
Well, look, a balance has to be struck here, David. We did extend that time frame from 3 to 4 years only in the last year. It was done in cooperation at the request of farm organisations. We always remain ready to continue to support additional assistance where needed.
Well, beyond 4 years?
At the moment, I'm comfortable with the settings we have for the farm household allowance. But only the other week, the Prime Minister announced an additional $100 million for local communities. And one aspect I think we are turning our attention to in that announcement and other initiatives is making sure we also help and assist the towns and communities affected by drought. It's not just farmers that are impacted, often the small businesses in the main street.
What would you say to a farmer in your community who's been in drought now more than 4 years? What would you say to them?
Well, the farm household allowance, has always been designed as a temporary and generous measure of assistance. Over time, we've got larger assistance through concessional
This drought's
loans.
going on and on. So what would you say to that farmer?
Well, what I would say is that we do have other ways of helping and assistance, particularly through those concessional loans. And, you know, if we've got to make sure we can have sustainable farms through Australia. We're providing lending on a 10-year basis with no repayment. So that provides a farmer to be able to finance their working capital and their broader business.
Borrow. They should take that up
and borrow. And that
go
gives
into
in
more
10
debt.
years, you know, you tend to, usually in a commercial environment, of course, you look to try and pay back something within a 10-year period. So that gives a lot of relief that you wouldn't get from a bank, obviously. You have to do P&I with a bank, but where we're providing very concessional terms, and that remains open and available to those affected by drought.
Final one, the Extinction Rebellion protests. I'm not sure how many you've come across over the past
I
week.
missed them all, David. I was very busy
Right.
this week, and I unfortunately couldn't get to any of them. I was very disappointed.
Well, OK, there's a lot of tough talk about what states should do to strengthen move on laws and indeed whether welfare should be stripped from some of them as well. What do you think?
Well, there's a lot in that question. Sometimes in my Machiavellian moments think, David, just keep letting them protest because they're doing better advertising for the mining sector than anyone else has done in the last couple of decades. People are pretty frustrated by this, David. Look, if I get serious here for a second, right, effectively what the Extinction Rebellion is saying is that they lost an election a few months ago, so they want to blackmail governments to do what they want anyway. You know, we've got a process in this country to decide controversial issues, and things around climate change are contentious and controversial. It's called the ballot box, and there was a fair and open election a few months ago, and decisions were made by the Australian people, and they should be respected. These people want to undermine the views of the Australian people. Now, I believe that where they're breaking the law in a repeated and sometimes premeditated fashion, there must be tougher penalties. I welcome the fact that the Queensland Government is finally taking some action here. This is largely a matter for state governments in terms of regulating streets. In terms of the welfare checks, I absolutely agree with Michaelia Cash, who's looking at how ways we might be able to clamp down on that aspect. Again, that should be for people who repeatedly and premeditatedly break the law. I want to say up front, I have no problem with people protesting, no problem with people going out in the streets and expressing their views. But if they do so in a way which unlawfully disrupts other law-abiding citizens from going about their day, well, they should suffer the consequences of that action.